You cannot afford to understand this money, let alone invest, my sister sneered, igniting laughter across the boardroom. They saw a broke charity worker, not the silent partner who had funneled $94 million into their accounts. I just sipped my coffee. When the CFO announced their lead investor was pulling out, the laughter died instantly. As the panic set in, every terrified eye in the room turned toward the only person still calm enough to smile. Me. My name is Eliza Shepard, and if you had seen me at 4 o'clock that Tuesday afternoon, you would never have guessed that I owned the deed to every single acre of soil beneath my feet. I was waist-deep in a trench of freezing mud, fighting a losing battle against a ruptured irrigation main that threatened to flood the prize-winning hydrangeas before the storm hit. The wind in the Hudson Valley has a way of finding the gaps in your clothes, and right now, it was cutting through my heavy canvas work jacket like a knife. My hands were encased in thick rubber gloves, but I could still feel the numbing chill of the water as it sprayed against my chest. I tightened the clamp on the PVC pipe with a grunt, the wrench slipping in my slick grip. Mud splattered across my face, coating my eyelashes and filling my mouth with the taste of wet earth and iron. This was the reality of running Shepherd Hollow Estate in retreat. People saw the glossy brochures, the $5,000 a night invoices, and the pristine Architectural Digest spreads. They did not see the owner shivering in a ditch because the lead groundskeeper was out with the flu, and I refused to let the lower gardens drown. My radio crackled on my hip, the static loud against the whistling wind. Bass to Eliza, the voice of my facility manager, Tom, cut through. Eliza, we have a situation at the main gate. Security says there is a convoy incoming. Did you authorize a VIP entry? I wiped the muck from my forehead with the back of my arm, leaving a streak of brown sludge across my skin. Negative. Tom, the estate is closed for maintenance until Monday. I cleared the calendar myself. Tell them to turn around. I tried, Tom replied, his voice sounding tight. They have a booking code, a valid one, and Eliza, these are not tourists. We are talking 6 black limousines and a Bentley. They are already rolling up the main drive. I scrambled out of the ditch, my heavy boots squelching loudly as they fought the suction of the clay. I stood on the ridge of the lower garden, panting, and looked toward the winding asphalt road that led to the main house. Sure enough, a procession of sleek black vehicles was gliding through the mist like a funeral procession for the ultra-wealthy. They moved with the entitlement of people who never had to reverse. I pulled my phone from the waterproof pocket of my overalls. My fingers were stiff, making it hard to unlock the screen. I opened the estate management application. The calendar should have been a blank slate of gray blocks, indicating a maintenance closure. Instead, it was blinking with a bright gold banner, Shepherd Family Private Event. I tapped the details, full catering, open bar, the grand ballroom and the terrace. The authorization signature at the bottom was a digital copy of my own, dated 3 days ago. Impossible, I whispered. 3 days ago, I was supposedly on a flight to Rome for a hospitality conference, a trip I had canceled at the last minute because of the storm warnings, deciding to stay and protect the property. Whoever booked this assumed I was 4,000 miles away across the Atlantic Ocean. Tom, do not engage, I said into the radio. Let me handle this. I did not go to the front door. I looked like a creature that had crawled out of a swamp. Instead, I moved quickly through the trellis tunnel. Using the dense cover of the wisteria vines to stay hidden, I needed to see who had the audacity to hack my system and invade my home. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a cold, sharp anger. This estate was my life's work. I had taken it from a crumbling, debt-ridden money pit my father left behind and turned it into the premier destination in New York State. Nobody walked in here without my permission. I circled around the back, climbing the steep, grassy slope that led up to the stone balustrade of the main terrace. The sound of the wind was replaced by the swell of a string quartet playing something light and classical. I could hear the clinking of crystal and the low, confident hum of expensive conversation. I crouched behind a large stone urn filled with ornamental cabbage, peering through the leaves. The terrace had been transformed. White silk tents rippled in the breeze, anchored by heavy silver weights. There were towers of seafood on ice, servers moving seamlessly with trays of hors d'oeuvres, and enough fresh white roses to bury a small village. It was a setup that would cost a client upwards of $50,000 for a single evening. And there, standing in the center of it all, was my sister. Jenna Shepherd, 26 years old and glowing with a radiance that money and a lack of conscience bought in equal measure. She was wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously bridal, floor-length silk that shimmered even under the overcast sky. She held a flute of champagne in one hand and was laughing, her head thrown back, exposing her long, elegant neck. I felt the blood drain from my face. Jenna had not set foot in Shepherd Hollow in 2 years, not since she called me a boring, work-obsessed spinster and demanded her share of the inheritance in cash to fund her failed fashion line in Paris. Now, here she was, hosting a gala in my house, drinking my cellar dry. I shifted my weight, my boot slipping slightly on a wet stone. A few feet away, a waiter popped the cork on a magnum of vintage champagne. The pressure sent the cork flying. It arced over the railing and struck me square in the shoulder with a surprising amount of force. Ouch! The cry escaped my lips before I could stop it. The music did not stop, but the conversation nearest the railing did. Jenna turned. She looked over the stone balustrade, her blue eyes narrowing as she scanned the bushes. I froze. There was no point in hiding now. I stood up slowly, my hands muddy, my hair a rat's nest of tangles and leaves, my oversized overalls caked in slime. I must have looked insane against the backdrop of tuxedos and designer gowns. "Eliza?" Jenna asked, but she did not sound surprised. She sounded annoyed. The guests around her turned to look. I recognized them. They were socialites from the city, investors I had been trying to court for the new spa wing. And standing right next to Jenna was Victoria Carrington, the matriarch of the Carrington banking dynasty, a woman I had been trying to get a meeting with for 6 months. She was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire maintenance budget for the quarter. Victoria looked at me. Her gaze swept from my muddy boots to my dirty face. Her lip curled slightly, a microscopic expression of distaste, as if she had smelled something rotting. I opened my mouth to speak. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them to get off my property, that Jenna was a fraud, that this party was unauthorized. I wanted to shout, "I am Eliza Shepherd, and I own this place." But before I could draw a breath, Jenna laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound, utterly devoid of warmth. "Oh, ignore that," Jenna said, waving her hand dismissively at me. She turned her dazzling smile back to Victoria and the other guests. "Please excuse the mess. That is just the help. We try to keep the estate authentic to its rustic roots, you know? We hired a local girl to do some character work in the gardens, for the aesthetic." She looked back at me, her eyes hard and warning. "Go back to the potting shed, dear. You are ruining the view." The humiliation hit me harder than the champagne cork. It was a physical blow to the gut. I stood there, trembling with rage, while the elite of New York chuckled politely. "Authenticity is so charming," a man in a velvet blazer murmured. "Very immersive." "A bit too much mud for my taste," Victoria Carrington noted dryly, turning her back on me. My fists clenched at my sides. The mud on my gloves cracked as the rubber stretched. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to climb over that railing and drag Jenna into the dirt with me. I wanted to expose her lies right there and then. But I stopped. I looked at Victoria Carrington's back. I looked at the investors. If I started screaming now, looking like a deranged swamp creature, nobody would believe I was the owner. They would believe Jenna, who looked the part, Jenna, who was charming them with my wine and my flowers. I would just be the crazy sister, the instability that proved they should never do business with Shepherd Hollow. Jenna was counting on my temper. She was counting on me making a scene so she could play the victim. I took a deep breath, tasting the rain that was starting to fall. The cold air filled my lungs, cooling the fire in my chest just enough for my brain to start working again. I was not just a gardener. I was a businesswoman who had turned a bankruptcy filing into a multi-million-dollar empire. I knew how to play the long game. I lowered my head, hiding the burning intensity in my eyes. I slumped my shoulders, adopting the posture of a scolded servant. "Sorry, ma'am," I mumbled, pitching my voice low and rough. "Just fixin' the pipes, ma'am." Jenna's smile widened in triumph. She thought she had won. She thought she had cowed me into submission. "Well, run along then," she said, turning back to her guests. "More champagne. Victoria, you simply must hear about my plans for expanding the West Wing." I stepped back into the shadows of the rhododendrons. As I slid down the slope, back toward the mud and the cold, I did not feel the chill anymore. I felt a different kind of cold. The cold calculation of a predator watching its prey. Jenna had made a fatal error. She assumed that because I looked like a laborer, I was powerless. She forgot that the person who tends the garden knows exactly where all the bodies are buried, and she had just invited me to watch her dig her own grave. I pulled out my phone again, shielding the screen from the rain. I accessed the security camera network. I was not going to interrupt the party. I was going to record it. Every conversation, every lie, every unauthorized bottle of wine. I would let her play the grand hostess for a few hours. I wiped a smear of mud from the screen and watched the feed of the terrace. Jenna was toasting to the future. "To the future," I whispered into the darkness. I turned and walked back toward the maintenance shed. I had work to do. And for the first time in years, it had nothing to do with fixing a broken pipe. The scent of rotting apples always takes me back to the beginning. It is not the crisp, sweet aroma of the harvest that the tourists love, but the cloying, vinegar-heavy smell of fermentation and neglect. 8 years ago, that was the only perfume Shepherd Hollow possessed. It was a graveyard of gnarled trees and a farmhouse that smelled of wet dog and defeat. My grandfather had let the bankruptcy filings pile up on the kitchen table like autumn leaves, ignoring the inevitable until the bank officers were practically parking in the driveway. I was 24 years old then. My parents were ready to sign the whole plot over to a condo developer from the city. They wanted the quick check. They wanted to wash their hands of the mud and the debt and the endless maintenance. I was the only one who saw the bones of something beautiful beneath the decay. I was the only one who wanted the legacy. I worked 2 jobs to save this place. I spent my mornings waitressing at a diner off the interstate from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, serving burnt coffee to truckers who tipped in loose change. Then, I would drive 40 minutes to a law firm where I filed papers until 9 at night. In the spaces between, I took online courses in hospitality management, studying profit margins and yield management on my phone while wiping grease off laminated menus. It took me 3 years to buy out my uncles. 3 years of eating instant noodles and wearing shoes with holes in the soles, so I could save every single penny to acquire the shares. When my name finally hit the deed, I did not celebrate with champagne. I sat on the porch in the dark and cried from sheer exhaustion. To my mother and father, Jenna was always the one with the spark. She was the golden child, the social butterfly who could charm a discount out of a stingy merchant, the one who looked good in photos. I was just the machinery in the background. I was the cold, practical sister who cared more about spreadsheets than Sunday dinner. They did not understand that the machinery was what kept the lights on. They did not see that while Jenna was backpacking through Europe on their dime, I was negotiating with contractors to fix the foundation. I rebuilt this place stone by stone. I turned the crumbling carriage house into a 12-room boutique lodge. I designed the spa to overlook the river, ensuring the meditation garden had the exact right angle of morning light to catch the mist. I planted the new orchard myself, digging the holes until my hands blistered and bled. Shepherd Hollow was not just a property to me, it was my breath. It was the only thing I had ever truly loved because it was the only thing that never disappointed me. If you treated the soil right, it gave you fruit. Humans were rarely so transactional. That was why accepting the invitation to speak at the Sustainable Tourism Conference in Italy had been such a massive step. It was prestigious, a validation that I had made it, that the industry saw Eliza Shepherd not just as a stubborn farmer, but as a visionary. I had my bags packed, My ticket was booked for a flight departing at 7 in the evening on Monday. But then the barometer dropped. The local weather reports started flashing warnings about a freak unseasonal freeze and high winds. I have 300 saplings in the north quadrant that are too young to survive a frost without cover. I could not leave them. It was a physical impossibility for me to sit on a plane while my trees froze. I did not call the airline to reschedule. I simply did not go. I told no one, not my staff, who I sent home early to be with their families before the storm hit, and certainly not my family. As far as my parents and Jenna knew, I was currently 30,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, sipping wine in business class, safely out of the picture for a week. It made our last conversation replay in my head with a sickening new clarity. Jenna had called me 2 weeks ago. She needed $20,000 to clear a credit card balance she had racked up during a networking trip to Tulum. I had said no. I offered her a job instead. I told her she could be the events manager at the estate, a real salary, health insurance, a retirement plan. She had laughed so hard I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "I was not born to clean up after you, Eliza," she had said, her voice dripping with that specific brand of pity she reserved for me. "I am a brand, not an employee." Now, standing in the rain outside the staff entrance, the pieces clicked together like the tumblers of a safe. She was not just using my house for a party. She was launching herself using my backdrop. She was banking on my absence. She needed me in Italy so she could play the role of the heiress. If I was the boring sister who ran the hotel, she was the glamorous shepherd who owned the estate. She was selling a lie to the Carringtons, and she was doing it on my dime, with my wine, in my home. This was not a prank. This was an annexation. I wiped the water from my eyes, smearing the mud on my cheek. I could not just walk in there and scream. Screaming makes you look hysterical. Hysterical women do not keep their companies. Hysterical women get patted on the head and told to calm down while the men sign the checks. I needed leverage. I needed paper. If Jenna was hosting a legitimate event, there would be contracts. If she was faking it, there would be emails. There would be a trail. Jenna was lazy with details. She always assumed that charm would cover the gaps in her logic. I bypassed the main kitchen entrance where the caterers would be buzzing. Instead, I used the old cellar door around the east side. It was hidden behind a stack of firewood. The key was still under the loose brick where I had kept it since I was 12 years old. The metal was cold and rusty in my hand, but it turned in the lock with a familiar heavy thud. I slipped inside the darkness of the cellar. The air here was cool and smelled of dust and vintage wine. Above my head, through the floorboards, I could hear the muffled thumping of the bass from the string quartet and the rhythmic tapping of high heels. They were dancing on my ceiling. I moved quietly past the racks of wine bottles. My destination was not the party. It was my office on the second floor. I had to get to my computer. I had to see what she had signed in my name. I had to know how deep the rot went before I could cut it out. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. It was no longer the frantic flutter of the girl who had been hit with a champagne cork. It was the heavy, deliberate beat of the owner walking her perimeter. Jenna wanted to play pretend. She wanted to act like she belonged here, but she forgot one crucial thing. She was just a guest. I was the house, and the house always wins. The service corridor was a jarring transition from the wet, dark chaos of the storm outside. Here, the fluorescent lights hummed with an aggressive brightness that made my eyes ache, and the air smelled of industrial lemon cleaner and floor wax. I moved quickly, my muddy boots squeaking against the pristine linoleum, leaving a trail of brown footprints that would usually have driven me crazy. Tonight, I did not care about the floor. I cared about the theft in progress upstairs. I rounded the corner near the prep kitchen and nearly collided with a young woman carrying a stack of linen napkins. She yelped, dropping the top 3 napkins onto the floor. It was Maya Brooks. I had hired her 3 months ago, fresh out of a tourism management program. She was 23, eager to please, and terrified of making mistakes. When she looked up and saw me, drenched, covered in mud, and looking like a vengeful swamp spirit, her face went completely pale. "Ms. Shepherd?" she squeaked. clutching the remaining napkins to her chest like a shield. Oh my God. The schedule said, you are supposed to be in Rome, in Italy. I did not have time to ease her into the situation. I stepped into her personal space, using the height of my work boots to loom over her. I channeled every ounce of the cold, authoritarian energy my mother always criticized me for. Maya, I said, my voice low and steady, why is there a string quartet on my balcony? And more importantly, why is my sister acting like she owns this building? Maya stammered, her eyes darting between my muddy face and the door to the kitchen. The email, ma'am. We got the urgent directive on Monday. From you. I thought it was from you. It said not to disturb you because of the time difference and the conference schedule. Show me, I commanded. Now. Maya scrambled to pull her tablet from the pocket of her apron. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to tap the screen 3 times to unlock it. She navigated to her inbox and turned the screen toward me. I snatched the device from her hand. The subject line read, Urgent. Family event authorization. Private. I looked at the sender address. At first glance, it looked legitimate. My name was there. The format was correct. But then I looked closer at the domain name. My corporate email was hosted at https google.com, search Shepherd Hollow, com. This email came from Eliza, Shepherd at shepherdestate.com. It was a spoof, a fake domain purchased specifically to deceive my staff. It lacked the word hollow. It was subtle enough that a junior employee like Maya, rushing to fulfill a request from the boss, would never notice the difference. But legally, it was a smoking gun. This was not just a sister borrowing a house. This was calculated identity theft. I scrolled down. The text of the email was a masterpiece of manipulation. Maya, please extend full hospitality to my sister Jenna and her guests for a private family gathering this week. I am approving a waiver of all venue fees as a personal gift. Charge all vendor costs to the Q3 marketing budget under client acquisition. Do not contact me for confirmation as I will be in meetings in Europe and cannot be disturbed. Just make it happen. Best, Eliza. And the contract? I asked, not looking up. Attached, ma'am, Maya whispered. I opened the PDF. It was a standard venue rental agreement, but the fields for payment had been zeroed out. At the bottom, there was a digital signature. My signature. I stared at the loop of the E and the sharp slash of the S. It was identical to the signature I used on my tax returns. Jenna must have lifted it from an old document and photoshopped it onto this fraudulent contract. My blood ran cold. This was wire fraud. This was forgery. If I wanted to, I could have the police here in 10 minutes. Jenna wasn't just being a brat. She was committing a federal crime. Did you approve the vendors based on this? I asked, handing the tablet back to Maya. Yes, ma'am, Maya said, her voice trembling. Ms. Jenna said you wanted the platinum package set up. She brought her own planner, but we had to front the deposits. Give me the clipboard, I said, pointing to the thick stack of papers tucked under her arm. Maya handed it over. I flipped past the guest list. Carringtons, Vanderbilts, names that meant old money and high influence, and went straight to the invoices. I scanned the numbers, my brain automatically tallying the damage. Imported white roses and hydrangeas from a greenhouse in the city, $12,000. A 6-piece string quartet, plus a jazz band for later, $8,500. Catering, including a raw bar with oysters flown in from Maine and Wagyu beef sliders, $24,000. Custom tenting and heating units for the terrace, $15,000. A professional camera crew and drone operator to capture social media content, $6,000. Valet service, security detail, and cleanup crew, $5,000. I flipped to the final summary page. The total estimated cost, charged to my business accounts, was $85,450. $85,000. That was my operating margin for the entire next quarter. That was the money for the new roof on the north barn. That was the bonus pool for my staff. Jenna was burning through a year of my hard work in a single evening to impress a boyfriend's mother. But it was the handwritten note at the bottom of the catering order that made me stop breathing for a second. Note: client has authorized full access to the owner's reserve wine cellar and the vintage bourbon vault. Open bottles as requested by VIP guests. No corkage fee. Charge replacement cost to the master account later. I felt a physical sharp pain in my chest. The owner's reserve was not just wine. It was a collection I had spent 7 years building. There were bottles of Pappy Van Winkle down there that were worth $3,000 a shot. There were vintage Barolos that I was saving for my own wedding, if I ever had one. Did they open the vault? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Maya nodded, looking like she wanted to cry. Yes, ma'am. About 20 minutes ago, the gentleman, Mr. Carrington, he asked for the bourbon. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The anger that had been a hot fire was now freezing into a block of ice. Jenna had not just stolen my money. She was looting my history. I looked at Maya. She was shaking, waiting for me to fire her. She was a kid who had been tricked by a professional grifter. Maya, look at me, I said. She looked up, her eyes wet. You did not know, I said firmly. This email is a forgery. The domain is fake. You were the victim of a sophisticated phishing attack. Do you understand? Maya blinked, the relief washing over her face so hard she almost collapsed. Yes, ma'am. You are not fired, I continued, but from this second forward, the chain of command has changed. You do not speak to Jenna. You do not take orders from anyone in that party. You listen only to me. Is that clear? Crystal clear, she said. What do you want me to do? Go to the kitchen, I said. Tell the catering manager to slow down the service. Do not stop it. Just slow it down. I want them waiting for their next drink. And Maya, give me the portable POS terminal. The credit card machine? She asked, confused. Yes, the one we use for table service. Maya reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out the sleek, black handheld device. It was heavy, solid, and capable of processing a transaction in 3 seconds. I took it. It felt good in my hand. Heavy, real. It was a weapon of commerce. Go, I said. Maya turned and ran toward the kitchen. I stood alone in the hallway for a moment, holding the POS machine. I slipped it into the deep front pocket of my muddy overalls. It bulged there, a hard lump against my hip. Jenna wanted to play business tycoon? Fine. I was about to give her a lesson in accounts receivable. I turned away from the kitchen and walked toward the heavy steel door at the end of the hall. It led to the basement. Down there, amidst the hum of the servers and the blinking lights of the network rack, was the security office. I needed to see exactly what was happening in my wine cellar. And then, I was going to print the bill. The magnetic lock on the heavy steel door disengaged with a sharp, electronic beep that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet hallway. I pushed the door open and stepped into the security center of Shepherd Hollow. The room was kept at a constant 65 degrees to protect the servers that hummed against the back wall. A wall of black metal and blinking green lights that served as the nervous system of the entire estate. Diego Morales was sitting in the ergonomic chair in the center of the room, his back to me. He was 45 years old, a former military engineer who treated the security of my hotel with the same seriousness he had once applied to a forward operating base. He had been with the Shepherd family for 15 years, sticking around even when the paychecks bounced during the bankruptcy era, because he believed in what I was trying to build. Perimeter sensors on the north fence are showing a fox again, Diego said without turning around, his eyes glued to the bank of 12 high-definition monitors mounted on the wall. I am going to send a drone to spook it before it gets into the chicken coop. Forget the fox, Diego, I said, my voice cutting through the hum of the cooling fans. Diego spun the chair around so fast the wheels screeched against the floor mat. When he saw me, drenched in rain, mud caking my boots, my hair plastered to my skull, his jaw actually dropped. He looked from me to the calendar on the wall, then back to me. Eliza? He stood up, knocking a clipboard off his desk. You are in Italy? I saw the itinerary. You are in Rome. I never left, I said, walking past him to the main control console. And apparently, it is a good thing I stayed. Status report. Now. Diego looked flustered, a rare state for a man who had seen combat. Ms. Jenna, she said you authorized this. She showed up yesterday with a whole team. She had the contracts, the emails. She said it was an engagement party and that you gave her full run of the place as a gift. She said you did not want to be disturbed during the conference. It is a lie, I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard to bring up the master override controls. The email was a spoof. The contract is a forgery. This is a hostile occupation. Diego. Diego's face hardened instantly. The confusion vanished, replaced by the stoic discipline of a soldier. What are your orders? Lock it down, I said. I want the main gate closed and electronically sealed. I want the service entrance locked. Nobody comes in. But more importantly, nobody leaves. If a car tries to exit, the bollards go up. Is that clear? Understood, Diego said. He typed a command sequence into his terminal. On the screen showing the main driveway, I watched the heavy iron gates swing shut and the magnetic locks engage. We are sealed. Do you want me to cut the power to the ballroom? No, I said, leaning in closer to the monitors. Leave the lights on. I need to see what they are doing. Audio? Audio is live, Diego said. I have the gain turned up on the ballroom mics and the library feed. I looked at the center monitor, the largest one. It showed the grand foyer of the main house. The crystal chandelier I had spent 3 months restoring was casting a warm golden glow over the crowd. There was Jenna. She was standing near the grand staircase, holding the hand of a man I recognized from the society pages, Liam Carrington. He was the heir to the Carrington Heritage Group, a hotel conglomerate that made my operation look like a lemonade stand. He was handsome in a generic, polished way, and he was looking at my sister with a mixture of adoration and calculation. This place is incredible, babe, Liam was saying, his voice coming through the speakers crisp and clear. I had no idea the acreage was this extensive. The tax valuation alone must be huge. Jenna laughed, leaning into him. Oh, it has been in the Shepherd family for 4 generations. It is our ancestral seat. My grandfather planted those orchards. My father designed the main hall. It is pure legacy. I felt a vein throb in my temple. Ancestral seat? Grandpa nearly lost it in a poker game, and Dad wanted to turn it into a strip mall. On the screen, an older couple approached them, Victoria and Charles Carrington. Victoria was holding a glass of my vintage Pinot Noir like it was water. It is charming, truly, Victoria said, looking around with a critical eye. But I was under the impression your sister ran the business side of things. We heard she was quite hands-on. Jenna waved her hand dismissively, the diamond on her finger catching the light. Eliza? Oh, bless her heart. She is wonderful with paperwork. We keep her on as a manager because, honestly, the administrative side is so tedious. She likes the spreadsheets, and I prefer the vision. It keeps the family peace to let her feel like she has a job here. It saves us the trouble of hiring an outside firm. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles turned white. A manager, I whispered. She called me a hired manager. Wait, Diego said, pointing to the screen. Listen to this. Jenna was leaning in closer to Victoria. Actually, that is something I wanted to discuss with you. Victoria, since Liam and I are getting serious, and we are looking at merging our assets, I was thinking about the future of the estate. Eliza is getting burned out. We are thinking of letting her retire early. Is that so? Charles Carrington asked. His interest piqued. Yes, Jenna continued, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial purr. We are opening up a private equity round, for family and close friends only, for a buy-in of $3 million. We could structure a lifetime ownership stake, exclusive access, no blackout dates. Essentially, you would own a wing of Shepherd Hollow. $3 million, I repeated, the number hanging in the cold air of the security room. Jenna was not just pretending to be the owner, she was selling equity. She was attempting to defraud the Carrington family of $3 million by selling shares she did not own, in a company she had zero legal claim to. That is grand larceny, Diego said, his voice grim. And securities fraud. Switch to camera 4, I commanded. The library. The image on the screen flickered and changed. The library was my sanctuary, a room of dark mahogany and leather books. Currently, it was occupied by 3 people: my mother, my father, and a man in a gray suit I recognized as Mr. Henderson, the family attorney who had helped my parents draft their wills years ago. They were huddled around the heavy oak desk, my desk. "She is just so exhausted, poor thing," my mother was saying, dabbing at her dry eyes with a handkerchief. "Eliza works herself to the bone. It is not healthy. We are worried about her mental stability." "The stress is too much for her," my father added, swirling his whiskey. "She has become erratic, obsessive. This trip to Italy, she barely wanted to go. We think it is time to intervene." Mr. Henderson nodded, sliding a thick document across the wood. "If you can get her to sign this addendum when she returns, citing health reasons, we can trigger the competency clause in the original trust. It would transfer executive voting rights back to the parents. With Jenna acting as the proxy, it is a standard reallocation of legacy assets to protect the principal." "We just want what is best for her," my mother sighed. "She needs to rest. Jenna can take the burden. Jenna is so good with people." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I stepped back from the console, my legs suddenly feeling weak. It wasn't just Jenna. It was all of them. My parents weren't just enabling her. They were active conspirators. They were planning a coup. They were using my hard work, my late nights, my sacrifices, as evidence of mental instability, so they could steal the deed and hand it to the golden child. "They are going to try to declare you incompetent," Diego said, his voice thick with disgust. "After you paid off their debts, after you bought them the condo in Florida. This is sick, Eliza." "It is business," I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. I forced myself to stand straight. To them, I am just an asset that has become difficult to manage. Diego reached for the landline phone on the desk. "I am calling the sheriff. Sheriff Miller is a good man. He will have a squad car here in 10 minutes. We have the audio. We have the video. This is conspiracy to commit fraud." "No," I said sharply. Diego paused, his hand hovering over the receiver. "Eliza, they are selling your house from under you. You have to stop this." "If I call the police now, what happens?" I asked, looking at the screen where Jenna was now clinking glasses with the Carringtons. "It becomes a messy civil dispute. Jenna claims it was a misunderstanding. My parents claim they were just concerned and exploring options. The Carringtons hush it up to avoid a scandal. Jenna gets a slap on the wrist and cries her way out of it." I looked at my parents in the library, plotting to take away the only thing I had ever built. "I do not want a disruption, Diego," I said, the cold anger returning, sharper and more focused than before. "I want an execution. I want them to sign the papers. I want Jenna to take the check. I want the fraud to be completed." "You want them to commit the crime?" Diego asked. "I want it undeniable," I said. "I want the hole to be so deep that when the sun comes up tomorrow, they cannot climb out of it. I want Victoria Carrington to see exactly who she is doing business with, and I want my parents to realize that the daughter they think is exhausted is the only one who is actually awake." I tapped the screen where Jenna's smiling face was frozen in high definition. "Let them drink my bourbon," I said. "Let them make their deals. When I walk into that room, I want to be holding the nails for their coffins." "Diego," I added, turning to the door, "print the transcripts, cut the video clips, load everything onto a secure drive, and get the secondary containment protocols ready." Diego nodded, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. He sat back down and cracked his knuckles. With pleasure, boss. I never liked that boyfriend anyway. I turned back to the dark hallway. The POS machine was heavy in my pocket. The evidence was recording on the servers. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the perfect moment to snap it shut. Corporate identity theft, wire fraud, forgery of a legal instrument, grand larceny, conspiracy to commit fraud. Diego listed the charges calmly, ticking them off on his fingers as we watched the monitors. The blue light from the screens reflected in his dark eyes, making him look less like a security guard and more like a prosecutor building a death row case. If we include the parents, I added, my voice devoid of emotion, we can add aiding and abetting, and if they actually take money from the Carringtons based on that fake equity pitch, it becomes securities fraud. That carries a mandatory prison sentence. Are we really doing this, Eliza? Diego asked, looking at me. Sending your sister to jail? I am not sending her anywhere, I replied, leaning back in the chair. She is driving herself there. I am just refusing to pump the brakes. On screen 3. The feed from the lower vault room flickered. My stomach tightened. The vault was a climate-controlled sanctuary where I kept the liquid assets of Shepherd Hollow. It was not just booze. It was an investment portfolio in glass bottles. We watched as a junior bartender, a kid named Kevin who I knew was working his way through college, hesitated in front of the heavy iron gate. He looked at a piece of paper, doubtless a printout of the fake email, and then keyed in the override code. The gate swung open. Zoom in, I commanded. Diego adjusted the resolution. Kevin walked past the racks of everyday wines and went straight to the locked cage at the back. He reached for a bottle on the top shelf. No, I whispered, the word escaping like a hiss of steam. Not the Hirsch. He pulled down a bottle of A.H. Hirsch Reserve. It was a 16-year-old bourbon distilled in 1974. There were fewer than a handful left in existence. Check the current valuation, I said, though I already knew the answer. Diego typed rapidly. Last auction price, $3,800, but with the market surge, you could easily get $4,500 for it. $4,500, I repeated. And she is going to mix it with Coke. On the screen, Kevin grabbed 2 more bottles, a Pappy Van Winkle 23-year, currently trading at nearly $6,000, and a bottle of Michter's Celebration, which I had paid $5,000 for at a charity auction 3 years ago. That is $15,000 in inventory, Diego said, his voice tight. In one trip, Eliza, we have to stop this. They are literally drinking your retirement fund. Let them, I said, though my hands were clenched into fists so tight my nails were digging into my palms. Every sip is a higher degree of felony. If the theft is under $1,000, it is a misdemeanor. It goes away with a fine. If it is over $50,000, it is a Class B felony. I need the number to be undeniable. I need the jury to gasp when they hear the total. We switched our attention to the main ballroom feed. The party was in full swing. The jazz band had taken over, playing a smooth, upbeat number. Jenna was standing near the center of the room, holding her phone up. She was live streaming. I pulled out my own phone and opened Instagram. I found her account immediately. She was live to her 12,000 followers. Hey guys, Jenna chirped on the screen, her face flushed with excitement and my champagne. Just showing you a little sneak peek of my engagement party at the family estate, Shepherd Hollow. It is just a little cottage my great-grandfather built, but we call it home. It is so magical to be able to host my friends in the house I grew up in. She grew up in a split level in New Jersey, I said to the empty room. She spent maybe 3 summers here, and she spent the entire time complaining about the mosquitoes. On the screen, she spun around, showing off the vaulted ceilings and the stone fireplace. We are thinking of doing a full renovation of the East Wing next year. I want to add a glass conservatory. Liam thinks it would be perfect for morning yoga. She panned the camera to Liam. He was holding a glass of amber liquid. My A? Hirsch, no doubt. He smiled for the camera, but the smile did not reach his eyes. He looked around the room, his brow furrowed slightly. You okay, babe? Jenna asked, lowering the phone slightly but keeping the stream running. It is just a lot. Jen, Liam said, his voice barely audible over the music, but picked up by the sensitive security microphones. Are you sure your sister is cool with all this? That bourbon? My dad said that is a $5,000 bottle. We just opened 3 of them. Jenna laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Oh, stop worrying. Eliza writes this stuff off. It is a business expense. Besides, what is mine is hers, and what is hers is mine. That is how the Shepherds operate. We are tight. Tight, Diego scoffed. Like a noose. Switch to the library, I ordered. I need to know what the endgame is. The screen changed. My parents were still sitting with the lawyer, Mr. Henderson. The mood there was less celebratory and more conspiratorial. My mother was pouring tea from a silver service that belonged to the estate's inventory. The structure has to be delicate, my father was saying, tapping a pen against the leather desk pad. We cannot just take it from her. That looks bad. It has to be a restructuring. Exactly, my mother agreed. We frame it as a partnership. After the wedding, we present it to Eliza as a gift. We tell her that Jenna wants to come on board as a co-owner to lighten her load. 50-50 split on equity, but Jenna takes the title of creative director and face of the brand. And the voting rights? Mr. Henderson asked. Split 3 ways, my father said. Eliza, Jenna, and us. That way, if Eliza disagrees with a direction, like she always does, Jenna and the family trust can overrule her. It ensures the business stays family-oriented. I felt a coldness settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the damp clothes I was wearing. They do not want to steal it, I realized aloud. They want to dilute me. They want to turn me into a minority shareholder in my own company. They want me to do the work, manage the staff, fix the pipes in the rain, while Jenna gets 50% of the profit and the final say on the decisions. They are talking about it like it is their property to give away, Diego said, shaking his head. They have forgotten that you bought the deed. You paid the mortgage. They never forgot, I said. They just never cared, to them. My success is just a resource for Jenna to harvest. They think because I am the strong one, I can take the hit. They think because I am the quiet one, I will not scream. I looked at the 2 screens. On one, my sister was claiming my home was her fairy tale. On the other, my parents were plotting to shackle me to her incompetence for the rest of my life. If I walked in there now and pulled the plug, if I asked the security team to clear the room quietly, my parents would spin it. They would tell the Carringtons that I was having a breakdown. They would say I was jealous of Jenna's happiness. They would say I was being petty about a few bottles of wine. Jenna would cry. My mother would look disappointed. And the narrative would be set. Eliza is the unstable, mean spinster sister who ruined the engagement party. No one would believe the truth because the truth was too ugly. I cannot do this quietly, I said, standing up. What do you mean? Diego asked. If I handle this behind closed doors, I lose, I explained, smoothing down the front of my dirty overalls. They will gaslight me until I doubt my own name. I need witnesses. I need impartial, high-net-worth witnesses who understand the value of $1 and the sanctity of a contract. I pointed to the main monitor, where Victoria Carrington was laughing at something Jenna said. Victoria Carrington runs a global banking empire, I said. She knows what fraud looks like, she knows what a hostile takeover looks like, and she has 0 tolerance for liabilities. You are going to do it in front of the guests? Diego asked, his eyes widening. I am going to do it in front of the money, I corrected. I am going to let Jenna finish her speech. I am going to let her dig the hole so deep she hits the bedrock, and then I am going to turn on the lights. I checked my pocket. The POS terminal was there. I checked the internal pocket of my jacket where I had stashed the printed email and the forged contract Diego had just handed me. Diego, I said, walking to the door. Give them 10 more minutes. Let them open another bottle. Let the bill get to $100,000 if they want. When I give the signal, when I raise my hand in the center of the room, I want you to cut the music. Not the lights, just the music. Complete silence. Copy that, Diego said. He was not smiling anymore. He looked like he was watching a soldier walk into the line of fire. Eliza, be careful. They are your family. I paused with my hand on the door handle. I looked back at the screen, at the people who shared my DNA, but not my code of ethics. No, I said softly. They are just unauthorized personnel. I opened the door and stepped back out into the hallway. It was time to crash the party. The glow of the monitors in the security room was the only light in my world. Diego had split the main display into a quadrant view, allowing us to watch the destruction of my life from 4 different angles simultaneously. It felt less like surveillance and more like an autopsy of my family relationships, performed in real time. Top left, Diego said, pointing to the feed from my private study. She is reeling her in. I looked. Jenna had pulled Victoria Carrington away from the main party and into the small, oak-paneled office I used for meeting with high-level vendors. It was a sacred space to me, a place where I had negotiated the contracts that saved the estate from foreclosure. Now, Jenna was leaning against my desk, crossing her ankles, looking for all the world like she had sat in that chair every day of her life. It really is a jewel, isn't it? Victoria was saying, running a hand over the leather back of my chair. This level of preservation in the Hudson Valley is rare, but Jenna, dear, you have to look at this not just as a home, but as a portfolio asset. The valuation must be significant. Oh, it is, Jenna replied, her voice smooth and practiced. But for Liam and me, it is about the legacy. We want to raise our children here. Victoria nodded, her eyes sharp. I was thinking, Jenna, as a wedding gift to the 2 of you, and to solidify the Carrington Heritage Group's interest in your domestic stability, I would be willing to buy into the estate, a buy-in for a long-term usage stake, say $3 million for a 20% equity hold and guaranteed blackout dates for the family? I heard Diego suck in a breath through his teeth. $3 million. She just put a price tag on your blood, sweat, and tears. On the screen? Jenna did not jump at the money. She was smarter than that. She feigned hesitation. She looked down at the floor, then back up at Victoria with a shy, troubled smile. That is incredibly generous, Victoria, Jenna said. And honestly, I would love that. It would give us the capital to really update the spa wing, but, well, you know Eliza. Your sister? Victoria asked. She is a bit conservative, Jenna lied, twirling a lock of hair around her finger. She gets very attached to the way things have always been. She thinks of herself as the guardian of the old ways. It can be difficult to get her to see the business logic, but don't worry, I know how to handle her. I just need to soften her up a bit. She usually listens to me if I frame it as a family necessity. I stared at the screen, my reflection ghostly against the image of my sister selling me out. So I am the obstacle, I said quietly. I am the stubborn backward mule that needs to be softened up, so the smart people can do business. Watch Victoria, Diego said sharply. On the screen. Jenna had turned to pour herself a drink from the crystal decanter on the sideboard. The moment her back was turned, the warmth vanished from Victoria Carrington's face. It was replaced by the cold, calculating look of a woman who ran a billion-dollar empire. Victoria pulled her phone from her clutch. She typed a message rapidly, her thumbs moving with lethal precision. Zoom on the phone, I ordered. Diego adjusted the digital crop. The resolution was grainy, but the text was legible. To Arthur, legal. Subject, Shepherd Hollow. Title, message, run a full title search and ownership structure verification on Shepherd Hollow immediately. Something feels off. Confirm if Jenna Shepherd has signatory power. She knows, Diego whispered. She smells blood. She suspects, I corrected. She does not know for sure yet. She thinks I am just a difficult partner. She does not realize I am the only partner. Bottom right, Diego said. The library. You are not going to like this. I shifted my gaze. My parents were in the library with Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer, and cousin Mark, a distant relative who worked in commercial real estate and had not visited us in 6 years. They were gathered around the large oil painting of the original farmhouse. My father was reaching behind the frame. He was trying to access the wall safe. "It is not opening," my father grunted, punching numbers into the keypad. 1980. That is Jenna's birth year. It has always been the code. "Try your anniversary," my mother suggested, looking over his shoulder nervously. He tried again. The small red light on the keypad blinked rapidly. Access denied. "Damn it," my father hissed, slamming his palm against the wall. "She changed it. That paranoid little—" He trailed off, but the insult hung in the air. "Eliza has always been possessive." My mother sighed, pouring herself another glass of my vintage wine. "She acts like we are going to steal the silver. We just want to see the deed. We just want to help. If we cannot get the deed, we have to approach this differently," Mr. Henderson said, tapping a folder on the table. "If Victoria Carrington puts $3 million on the table, we use that pressure. We tell Eliza that rejecting such an investment is a breach of her fiduciary duty to the family trust, even if that trust is technically dissolved. We guilt her. We tell her she is holding Jenna back from her future. We can rewrite the operating agreement," cousin Mark added, loosening his tie. "If Jenna brings the capital, Jenna deserves the equity. We force Eliza to sign a dilution clause. We tell her it is for her own good, that the stress is too much for her." "They are actually trying to break into my safe," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "They are not just playing along with Jenna's lie. They are actively strategizing on how to strip me of my property." "They think the safe has the deed," Diego said. "They do not know the deed is in a safety deposit box at the bank." "They do not know anything," I said. "They do not know the mortgage rates. They do not know the insurance premiums. They do not know that I refinanced 3 times to keep this roof over their heads. They just see a pie, and they are angry that I am the one holding the knife." "Center screen," Diego said. "The speeches are starting." I looked at the main feed. The ballroom was packed. Jenna was standing on the bottom step of the grand staircase, the light from the chandelier catching the sequins on her dress. Liam was standing next to her, looking handsome and proprietorial. Someone tapped a spoon against a glass. The room went quiet. "Thank you all for coming," Jenna said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You know, when I was a little girl, running through these halls, I used to dream about this day. I used to tell my daddy that one day I would fill this house with love and laughter again. And standing here tonight, with Liam, knowing that we are going to build our life together in my childhood home, it is literally a dream come true." The crowd applauded. My parents beamed from the front row. "It is a lie," I whispered. "She hated this house. She called it the drafty barn. She begged to go to boarding school." Then Liam stepped forward. He put an arm around Jenna's waist. "I just want to say," Liam began, his voice projecting confidently, "that the vision Jenna and I have for Shepherd Hollow is bold. We are not just keeping history alive. We are making it. We are already talking to architects about expanding the retreat capabilities, bringing in a world-class wellness center, and really putting the Shepherd Carrington stamp on the hospitality map." He raised his glass. "To the future of Shepherd Hollow. To our home." "To the future," the guests chorused. Not once did they mention my name. Not once did they acknowledge that the floor they were standing on, the wine they were drinking, the roof over their heads, was all provided by the sister they had erased from the narrative. I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was the same feeling I got right before I signed a massive contract, or right before I fired a contractor who was stealing materials. It was the absolute certainty of the next move. "Diego," I said, "what time is it?" 6:58, Diego replied. "Sunset was 10 minutes ago." "The cake comes out at 7, I said, "and the fireworks display Jenna ordered, the one that cost $12,000, is scheduled for 7:15. "If you go in now," Diego said, looking at me with concern. You can stop the toast. You can interrupt the narrative. No, I said, shaking my head. It is not enough. If I go in now, it is just a family squabble. Victoria is suspicious, but she hasn't seen the kill. My parents are annoyed, but they haven't been exposed. I need them to feel safe. I need them to think they have won. I watched Jenna lean up and kiss Liam. I watched my parents clapping, the proud architects of my replacement. I want the cake to be cut, I said. I want them to eat the sweetness of it. I want the fireworks to start. I want everyone looking up at the sky, marveling at how beautiful the lie is. And then? Diego asked. And then, I said, checking the battery on the POS terminal in my pocket, I am going to hand them the bill. I walked over to the rack where the emergency rain gear was stored. I grabbed a clean, dry towel and wiped the worst of the mud from my face, but I did not try to make myself look presentable. I wanted the contrast. I wanted the dirt. I wanted to look exactly like what I was, the person who did the work. Diego, I said, turning back to him, when the first firework goes off, you cut the music, you lock the library doors remotely so my parents cannot hide, and you project the security feed from the vault onto the main presentation screen in the ballroom. Diego's eyes widened. The feed of them stealing the bourbon? Exactly, I said. Let us give them a show they will never forget. I walked to the door. The time for observation was over. The time for eviction had begun. I am going upstairs, I said. Do not start the show without me. I stepped out into the hall, the sounds of the party drifting down through the floorboards. They were celebrating my erasure, but they were about to learn a very expensive lesson. You can pretend to own the house, but you can never pretend to be the foundation. And if the foundation decides to move, the whole house comes down. The heavy service door swung open with a pneumatic hiss that cut through the low hum of the catering staff. I stepped out of the back corridor and into the short hallway that led directly to the main ballroom. The transition was jarring. Behind me lay the sterile, lemon-scented world of the kitchen and the cold, blue light of the security office. Ahead of me, the air was warm and thick with the scent of expensive perfume, vanilla cake, and the ozone smell of indoor pyrotechnics. I walked past a server tray loaded with empty champagne flutes. The young man holding it froze, his eyes widening as he took in my appearance. I did not stop. I did not look down at my clothes. I knew exactly what I looked like. I was wearing oversized canvas overalls, caked in drying gray clay. My jacket was stained with grease and rain. My boots, heavy steel-toed work boots that I had worn to dig irrigation trenches since 5 that morning, were coated in a thick layer of mud. I reached the double mahogany doors that separated the service wing from the grand foyer. I did not hesitate. I pushed them open with both hands, using the full weight of my body. The doors swung wide, revealing the golden glow of the party, the chandelier, a massive crystal fixture I had spent 3 months sourcing crystals for in Austria, cast a dazzling light over the crowd. There must have been 200 people there. The women were in cocktail dresses that shimmered like fish scales, and the men were in bespoke suits that cost more than my tractor. The sound of the jazz band washed over me, but it was the sound of my own footsteps that mattered. The foyer had been fitted with a runner, a pristine, white plush carpet that Jenna had ordered specifically for her entrance. It ran from the staircase to the center of the room. I stepped onto it. Thud! My right boot landed heavily on the white fabric. A thick glob of mud detached from the heel and smeared into the fibers, leaving a dark, ugly scar on the perfection. Thud! My left boot followed. Another stain. Another heavy, wet sound that seemed to echo under the high ceilings, cutting through the chatter of the guests. I walked with a steady, rhythmic pace. Thud, thud, thud. The conversations nearest to me died instantly. Heads turned. I saw a woman in a red silk dress gasp and cover her mouth. A man near the bar lowered his glass, frowning in confusion. Is that the gardener? Someone whispered loudly to my left. My God, look at the floor, another voice hissed. She is ruining the carpet. Security! A woman's voice rang out, shrill and indignant. Why is the help coming in through the front? I kept my eyes locked on the center of the room. Jenna and Liam were standing there, poised over a 5-tier cake decorated with sugar-spun flowers. They were holding a silver knife together, smiling for the cameras. The flash of the photographer's strobe light illuminated Jenna's terrified expression as she looked up and saw me. Her smile faltered, then vanished. Her face went the color of the icing on the cake. For a second, she looked like the little girl who had broken Mom's favorite vase, but then the mask slammed back into place. She let go of the knife and stepped forward, waving her hand frantically at a nearby waiter. "Get her out of here," Jenna hissed, though her voice carried in the sudden silence of the room. "Someone get security! She is drunk! She is ruining the photos!" 2 waiters took a tentative step toward me, but they stopped when I turned my head and looked them in the eye. They knew me. They knew who signed their checks. They retreated into the shadows without a word. I ignored Jenna. I ignored Liam, who was staring at me with his mouth slightly open, looking like a fish that had been pulled onto a dock. I walked past the cake, leaving a trail of brown footprints that bisected the room like a wound. I headed straight for the VIP table near the fireplace, the Carrington table. Victoria Carrington was sitting there, looking regal and bored, until I approached. She stiffened, pulling her skirt away from the path of my muddy boots. On the table in front of her sat a bottle of amber liquid. It was the A.H. Hirsch Reserve. I stopped at the table. I reached out with a gloved hand, the rubber still slick with wet clay, and picked up the bottle. The crystal glass looked absurd against the dirty yellow rubber of my work glove. A.H. Hirsch Reserve, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room without shouting. Distilled in 1974, bottled in 2003. There are less than 400 of these left in circulation. I turned the bottle so the label faced the light. Current market value at auction is $4,500, I continued, my tone conversational, as if I were reading a stock report. And I see you have finished about half of it. Excuse me? Victoria Carrington said, standing up. Her voice was ice cold. Young woman, put that down. You are making a scene. Where is the manager? I am the manager, I said, meeting her gaze. And the owner, and the person whose cellar you are drinking. I turned slightly, looking toward the main entrance where Diego had quietly positioned himself. He was standing with his arms crossed, wearing his full security uniform, looking imposing and official. Diego, I called out. Yes, ma'am, Diego replied, his voice booming like a drill sergeant's. Check the inventory logs, I said, holding the bottle up like a piece of evidence. Do we have a withdrawal authorization for a 1974 Hirsch Reserve serial number 452? The room was deathly silent. Everyone was watching. The jazz band had stopped playing. Checking now, Diego said, looking at his tablet, even though he knew the answer. Negative. No authorization found. That item is listed as restricted inventory. Removal constitutes theft. And the owner? I asked. Who is the registered owner of that bottle and this facility? Eliza Shepard, Diego said, enunciating every syllable. Owner and sole proprietor of Shepard Hollow Estate and Retreat. The name hung in the air. Ms. Shepard. Not the hired help. Not the crazy sister. The owner. I heard a gasp from the direction of my parents. I did not look at them. I kept my eyes on Jenna. Jenna's face was a mask of panic. She rushed forward, abandoning Liam at the cake table. This is ridiculous, she laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. Everyone, please, this is just... My sister is having a moment. She has been under a lot of stress lately. She is obviously having a breakdown. Eliza, give me the bottle. You are embarrassing yourself. She reached for the bourbon. I pulled it back sharply. Stress? I asked. No, Jenna. Stress is digging a trench in a freezing rainstorm to save the orchard while you throw a party you did not pay for. I reached into the deep front pocket of my overalls and pulled out the black POS terminal. I woke the screen. The green glow illuminated the mud on my chin. I have been doing some math, I said, addressing the room at large. Between the flowers, the catering, the band, the tent rental, and the unauthorized consumption of vintage assets. I tapped a few keys on the machine. The total comes to $85,450, I said, and that is before we calculate the damages to the carpet. I held the machine up in the air, offering it to the room. Who is paying? I asked, because the credit card on file was a corporate account that did not authorize this event. In fact, the authorization came from a spoofed email address. I turned to look directly at Victoria Carrington. That is wire fraud. Mrs. Carrington, I said softly, using a fake domain to authorize the theft of services and goods across state lines. It is a federal offense. Jenna lunged at me then. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into the thick canvas of my jacket. "Stop it!" she screamed, dropping the act completely. "You are just jealous. You have always been jealous. You are trying to ruin my engagement because you are a miserable, lonely spinster who cares more about dirt than family. Get out of my house." "Your house?" I repeated. I shook her hand off me. It was easy. She was weak, and I spent my days hauling 50-pound bags of fertilizer. She stumbled back, nearly tripping over the train of her white dress. "Jenna," I said, my voice dropping to a register that was pure steel. "You forged my signature. You created a fake email domain. You stole $80,000 from my operating budget. You are selling equity in a property you do not own to people you are lying to." I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the stunned guests. "There is no family money here," I said. "There is no ancestral seat. There is just a business, my business, and tonight, the business is closed." "She is lying," Jenna shrieked, looking frantically at Liam, then at her parents. "Mom! Dad! Tell them she is crazy. Tell them she is just the manager." My parents stood up from their table in the corner. My father looked furious, his face purple. My mother looked terrified. They were caught in the spotlight, and for the first time, they had to choose, not in private, where they could bully me, but here, in front of the people they were desperate to impress. "Eliza," my father started, his voice booming, "that is enough. Go to your room." "I am 32 years old, Dad," I said, "and I own the room you are standing in. If you want me to leave, you are going to have to call the police, and if you call the police, I am going to hand them the file I just compiled in the security office." I held up the POS machine again, thrusting it toward Jenna. $85,000, I said. "Debit or credit? Or do we call the sheriff?" The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the wind rattling the window panes and the soft hum of the refrigeration unit on the cake display. Every eye in the room shifted from the girl in the white dress to the woman in the mud. They were waiting to see if the check would clear, or if the handcuffs would come out. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was not the expectant hush of a crowd waiting for a toast. It was the terrified vacuum of a room holding its breath. 200 of New York's wealthiest socialites were staring at the mud on my boots and the small black machine in my hand. $85,450, I repeated, my voice steady. "Pay it now, Jenna, or Diego opens the gate for Sheriff Miller." Jenna looked at the machine like it was a loaded gun. Her hand was shaking so badly that the diamond on her finger, the ring that was supposed to seal this fraudulent deal, scattered light frantically across the ceiling. I do not have my purse," she stammered, her eyes darting to the exits. "It is upstairs, in the bridal suite." "I brought it down for you," Diego said from the doorway. He walked forward, holding her beaded clutch. He placed it on the table next to the uneaten cake. "I figured you might need it." Jenna glared at him, a flash of pure hatred cutting through her panic. She snatched the bag and ripped the zipper open. Her movements were jerky, uncoordinated. She dug through lipsticks and compacts until she found her wallet. She pulled out a platinum card. It was heavy, shiny, and designed to look impressive. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. jamming the chip into the bottom of the POS terminal I was holding out. My limit is huge. I am going to sue you for this. Eliza, I am going to sue you for emotional distress and public humiliation. Processing, I said, ignoring her threats. The screen on the terminal displayed a spinning circle. The room leaned in. I could actually hear the ice melting in the untouched champagne buckets. A waiter near the wall shifted his weight, and the creak of his shoe sounded like a gunshot. Then came the sound. Beep. It was a flat, ugly, electronic rejection. I turned the screen so the room could see the red letters glowing against the green background. Transaction declined. Try it again, Jenna snapped, though the blood had drained from her face. It is your stupid machine. The internet connection is bad out here in the sticks. The connection is fiber optic, I said calmly. And the machine is fine. Your card is maxed out. Jenna. That is impossible, she shrieked. I paid the minimums last week. Do you have another card? I asked. Diego, how far is the sheriff? 2 minutes out, Diego replied, checking his watch. He is just passing the lower orchard. No, Jenna cried. She looked at Liam, her eyes wide and wet. Liam, baby, can you put it on your card? Just for tonight? My accounts are all tied up in trust transfers. You know how banks are. I will wire it to you on Monday. I promise. Liam blinked. He looked at the decline message on the screen, then at his mother, Victoria, who was sitting perfectly still, her face a mask of stone. Liam started, patting his pockets. I mean, $85,000 is a lot to just put on a personal card without calling the bank first. Jen. I do not have another card, Jenna confessed, the words tearing out of her throat. Everything I have is leveraged against the wedding. I was waiting for the settlement. I was waiting for the merger. My parents rushed forward then. My father, sweating in his tuxedo, pulled out his wallet. Here, he said, his voice breathless. He slapped a gold card onto the table. Use mine. Just stop this madness. Eliza, we will settle this as a family. I canceled the transaction and inserted my father's card. Processing. Beep. Transaction declined. My father stared at the machine. There must be a mistake. I have a $20,000 limit on that. The total is $85,000. Dad, I said, even if it was empty, it would not cover the catering. Do you have $70,000 in cash on you? My mother fumbled with her purse. Try mine. Try the joint account. I took the card. I swiped it. Beep. Transaction declined. Insufficient funds, I read aloud. My mother covered her mouth with her hand. But we refinanced the house. We put the equity line on that card for the deposit. You mortgaged your house? I asked, looking at them. You mortgaged the home you live in to pay for a party at a house you do not own? We thought. My father's voice cracked. He looked at the Carringtons. We thought it was an investment in the future. The murmuring in the room started then. It began as a low buzz and quickly swelled into a roar of whispered judgment. I saw guests pulling out their phones. They were not taking photos anymore. They were Googling laws. Is that fraud? Someone whispered loud enough to be heard. Mortgaging a house for a party? That is desperate, another voice sneered. They are broke, a woman in emerald earrings said to her husband. The whole family is broke. They are grifters. Liam Carrington stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. He looked sick. Eliza, look, he said, his voice trembling. Let us take a breath. Obviously, there is a liquidity issue tonight, but we can work this out. I can talk to my bankers on Monday. We can set up a payment plan, installments. We can structure a debt schedule. I looked at him. He was weak. He was trying to negotiate a business deal in the middle of a crime scene. Liam, I said, my voice cutting through his babble. You do not pay for stolen goods on an installment plan. This is not a loan. This is theft of services. You do not negotiate a payment schedule with a shoplifter after you catch them stuffing diamonds in their pocket. "It is not shoplifting," Jenna screamed. "It is my house." "It is not your house," I shouted back, my control finally fraying at the edges. "You have never paid a utility bill. You have never fixed a leak. You do not even know where the fuse box is. You are a guest who overstayed her welcome by 20 years. The room fell silent again. Then, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor echoed through the hall. Victoria Carrington stood up. She did not look at Jenna. She did not look at my parents, who were huddling together like frightened sheep. She looked straight at me. Her eyes were cold, hard, and assessing. She was looking at me not as a muddy gardener, but as the only other predator in the room. She opened her clutch. She pulled out a card. It was black, made of anodized titanium. It had no numbers on the front, just the silver crest of Meridian Private Bank. She walked over to me. Her heels clicked sharply on the stone floor, avoiding the runner I had soiled. She placed the card on the table next to the POS machine. $85,450, Victoria said. Her voice was calm, authoritative, and utterly devoid of warmth. Charge it all. Add 20% for the staff gratuity. They have had to deal with enough tonight. Mom, Liam squeaked. You are paying for it? Victoria did not look at her son. She kept her eyes locked on mine. I am not paying for the party, Victoria said. I am buying a non-disclosure agreement. I am buying silence. I am buying the immediate removal of my family's name from this sordid little police report you are threatening to file. I looked at the card. Then I looked at Victoria. If the transaction clears, I said, I will call off the sheriff. The debt to Shepherd Hollow will be settled, but I cannot control the gossip. I can control the gossip, Victoria said. I just need the legal liability gone. Run the card. I picked up the heavy black card. It felt cold in my hand. I inserted it into the machine. Processing. There was no hesitation this time. Approved. The machine spat out a receipt. I tore it off and placed it on the table next to the card. You are all paid up, I said. The gate is open for you, Mrs. Carrington. Victoria picked up her card and slid it back into her purse. Then, slowly, she turned to face her son. Liam was standing next to Jenna, looking like a child waiting for a scolding. Jenna was weeping silently, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. Liam, Victoria said, get your coat. Mom, wait, Liam pleaded. Jenna didn't mean to. She just got carried away. We can fix this. Fix what? Victoria asked. She lied to us. She stole from her own sister. She tried to sell me equity in a property she has no claim to. That is not getting carried away. Liam, that is a criminal mindset. Victoria looked at Jenna with a gaze that could have stripped paint from a wall. The Carrington Group does not merge with liabilities, Victoria stated, and we certainly do not marry into families that require bail money for their engagement parties. She looked at Liam's hand. The ring, Liam, she ordered. No, Jenna gasped, clutching Liam's arm. Liam, no, don't listen to her. We love each other. Tell her. Liam looked at Jenna. He looked at the mud on the floor. He looked at his mother, who held the purse strings to his entire inheritance. He slowly peeled Jenna's fingers off his arm. I am sorry, Jen, Liam whispered. But my mom paid $85,000. It is too much. He reached for Jenna's left hand. She tried to pull away, but he held firm. He slid the massive diamond ring off her finger. It made a sharp, hollow clack as he placed it on the table next to the receipt. I think we should go, Liam said, refusing to meet her eyes. Liam! Jenna screamed, falling to her knees on the ruined white carpet. You cannot leave me! Not like this! Not in front of everyone! Victoria Carrington turned to me one last time. Ms. Shepherd, she said, nodding her head slightly. You run a tight ship. I respect that. If you ever decide to sell legitimately, call my office. Until then, good evening. She turned and walked toward the door, her son trailing behind her like a beaten dog. The rest of the guests followed, A silent exodus of silk and diamonds, stepping over the mud, leaving my family alone in the wreckage of their own greed. The receipt sat on the table like a white flag of surrender. But the war was not over. Victoria Carrington had paid the bill to save her reputation, not to save my sister. The guests were shifting, an uneasy murmur rippling through the room as they looked for the exits. But I was not done. I could not let them leave thinking this was just a financial dispute. I needed them to understand the anatomy of the betrayal. "Wait," I said, my voice cutting through the rustle of silk and the clinking of glass. "Before anyone leaves, there is one last thing on the agenda. Jenna promised you a presentation about the future of Shepherd Hollow. I think we should watch it." I signaled to the tech booth in the back corner of the ballroom. My media team, who had been prepping for a promotional shoot next week, had been working with Diego in real time. They had compiled the footage. "Eliza, stop," my mother pleaded. Stepping forward, her face was gray. "The bill is paid. Let it go." "The bill is paid," I agreed, looking at her with eyes that felt like dry ice. "But the record is not set straight." I nodded to the technician. "Play it." The massive projection screen behind the cake table, which was supposed to show a montage of Jenna and Liam's courtship, flickered to life, but instead of romantic beach photos, the stark, high-definition feed of a security camera filled the wall. The date stamp in the corner read, Monday, October 14th, 10:42 a.m. The location was my parents' living room in New Jersey. The room gasped. There, on the screen, was Jenna. She was sitting at the dining room table with her laptop. The audio was crystal clear. "Okay, I got the domain," Video Jenna said, typing furiously. "shepherdestate.com. It looks exactly like the real one if you do not squint. I am generating the digital signature now. I just lifted Eliza's from the tax documents Dad sent over." She picked up her phone, dialing a number on speaker. "Hey, Maya," Video Jenna chirped, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Yeah, it is Jenna. Listen, Eliza is super swamped with prep for Italy. She told me to handle the coordination for the family party. Yeah, she's going to email you the authorization in like 5 minutes. Just waive the fees, okay? She wants it to be a tax write-off." Jenna hung up and laughed. She turned to someone off camera. A friend, perhaps. God, it is so easy. My sister is such a control freak she never checks her spam folder. By the time she lands in Rome, we will be drinking her best scotch. In the ballroom, the real Jenna stood frozen. Her face was devoid of color. The mascara tears had dried into black tracks on her cheeks. There was no way to spin this. It was not a misunderstanding. It was premeditated fraud. The scene cut. Tuesday, October 15th, 4:15 p.m., the wine cellar. On the screen, Jenna was leading a group of her friends into the climate-controlled vault. She waved her hand at the racks of vintage bottles like she was Vanna White. "Grab whatever you want," Video Jenna said. "The Hirsch? Sure. The Pappy? Why not? Eliza hoards this stuff. She does not even drink it. She just likes looking at the labels. Consider it a liberation." "Is she going to be mad?" a friend asked, pulling a $3,000 bottle of Bordeaux from the rack. "Who cares?" Video Jenna scoffed. "She works for us. Basically, technically she owns the deed, but I am the one bringing the class. Without me, she is just a farmer in muddy boots." I handheld her through the whole email. She thinks she is a genius, but she is actually kind of pathetic. A collective cringe went through the room. I saw Liam look down at his shoes, his face burning with shame. He had been standing next to her when she said those things. He had drunk that wine. "And finally," I said, my voice echoing in the silent hall, "the board meeting." The screen flickered one last time. Today, 6:30 p.m., the library. My parents appeared on the screen, huddled with the family lawyer and cousin Mark. This was the footage that Diego had captured just an hour ago. "We need to leverage the Carrington money." My father's voice boomed from the speakers. "If Victoria buys in for $3 million, we use that cash to force a restructuring. We tell Eliza the estate is too big for her to manage alone. She is so unstable," my mother's voice added, sounding reasonable and concerned. We frame it as a mental health intervention. We take voting control for her own good. Then we put Jenna in charge of the brand. Eliza can stay in the back office where she belongs. She is good with the numbers, but she has no vision. She is the help, really. We just need to make sure the deed transfer is buried in the trust addendum, the lawyer suggested. She rarely reads the fine print on family documents. She trusts you. She does, my father agreed, a smug smile playing on his lips. She always does what we tell her in the end. She is desperate for approval. The clip ended. The screen went black. The silence in the ballroom was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a guillotine blade hanging at the top of its arc. My parents were standing like statues. My father's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. My mother looked at the floor, unable to meet the eyes of her friends, her neighbors, or the daughter she had just conspired to rob. Desperate for approval, I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I walked to the center of the room. I did not look at the guests anymore. I looked only at the 3 people who shared my last name. I have spent 10 years trying to buy that approval, I said quietly. I paid off the mortgage on your house in New Jersey. I paid for Jenna's tuition. I paid for your cars. I paid for your vacations. And all this time, you looked at me and saw a mark. You saw a bank account with a pulse. I turned to the room at large. From this moment forward, I announced, my voice hard and clear, Jenna Shepherd, Leonard Shepherd, and Marie Shepherd are permanently banned from the grounds of Shepherd Hollow. If they set foot on this property again, they will be arrested for trespassing. Eliza, please, my mother sobbed, reaching out a hand. We were just talking. It was just talk. It was conspiracy, I corrected. And it is over. All financial support is terminated effective immediately. The credit cards are canceled. The monthly stipends are stopped. The tuition payments for Jenna's fashion courses are finished. I turned to Jenna. She was shaking, her white dress looking like a shroud. You have 2 choices. Jenna, I said. Option 1, Diego opens the gate. The sheriff comes in. I hand him the hard drive with the evidence of wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. You go to jail tonight. You will be a felon before you are 30. Jenna let out a choked sound, a whimper of pure terror. Option 2, I continued. You go into that office right now with my lawyer, who is on speakerphone. You sign a full confession. You sign a promissory note to repay every single cent of the $85,000 Victoria just paid, plus interest. And you sign a permanent restraining order granting me 1,000 yards of distance from you for the rest of your life. I looked at her. Jail or the pen? Jenna, decide, now. Jenna looked at Liam, but he had stepped back, putting distance between them. She looked at our parents, but they were paralyzed by their own exposure. I will sign, Jenna whispered. Please, Eliza, I will sign. Good, I said. Diego, escort her to the office. I turned to Victoria Carrington. She was standing by the door, her face unreadable. Mrs. Carrington, I said, I assume you will want a document stating that you and your son were unknowing victims of this fraud? To ensure there is no blowback on your regulatory filings? Victoria nodded slowly. That would be prudent. My legal team will draft a statement confirming that the Carrington Heritage Group has no affiliation with Jenna Shepherd and that we were misled regarding the ownership of the venue. She looked at me with a strange expression. It was not kindness. Exactly. It was recognition. You handled this efficiently, Victoria said. It is a shame your family does not appreciate that efficiency. She turned to Liam. Come. Liam lingered for a second. He looked at me. Eliza, I really did not know about the email, about the plan. I thought she really owned it. I believe you. Liam, I said. But you were willing to spend $3 million without doing a title search. That makes you dangerous to my business. Goodbye. Liam flinched. He looked back at Jenna, who was being led away by a security guard. sobbing into her hands. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. He turned and followed his mother out into the night. Jenna stopped at the doorway to the office. She looked back at the exit, where the cars were waiting. For a second, I saw her tensing, her eyes darting to the gap between the security guards. "Do not even think about it," Diego said, stepping into her path. His broad frame blocked the light. "The gates are locked, Jenna, and the sheriff is parked at the bottom of the drive waiting for the call. There is no running from this." Jenna slumped. The fight went out of her. She looked small, defeated, and utterly alone. My parents stood in the middle of the empty dance floor. The music was gone. The guests were filing out, whispering, casting glances of pity and disgust. "Eliza," my father said, his voice a husky rasp. "We are your parents." "No," I said, turning my back on them to look at the empty screen. "You are just the previous management, and you have been let go." I signaled to the remaining security staff, "Show them out." I did not watch them leave. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the smell of expensive flowers and the ruin of a party that had cost more than my first year's profit. The mud on the carpet was drying into a crust. The cake was uncut. The champagne was warm. But the silence? The silence was mine, and for the first time in my life, it didn't cost me a thing. "Please, sit down," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the stunned silence of the ballroom. "The food is already paid for. The band has been compensated for 4 hours. It would be a waste to let the Wagyu sliders get cold." It was a surreal command, but the guests obeyed. They were New Yorkers. After all, they were accustomed to strange performance art, and tonight I had given them a front-row seat to the most expensive reality show in the Hudson Valley. Slowly, hesitantly, people returned to their tables. The clinking of silverware resumed, but the laughter did not. The air was thick with the tension of a play where the lead actress had just been executed in the second act. I did not sit. I stood near the pillar by the entrance, watching the corner where the real business was being concluded. Jenna sat at a small side table. She was no longer the glowing bride-to-be. She was a woman drowning in paperwork. My lawyer had emailed the documents to the hotel printer 5 minutes ago, and Diego had brought them out on a silver tray usually reserved for appetizers. Jenna signed. Her hand was shaking so violently that the pen tore through the paper on the first page. She signed the confession. She signed the promissory note, acknowledging a debt of $85,450, payable to me with interest. She signed the non-disclosure agreement that Victoria Carrington's legal team had forwarded, absolving the Carrington Heritage Group of any knowledge of her fraud. Each signature was a frantic scratch, a desperate attempt to buy her freedom before the sheriff, who was standing quietly by the door with his arms crossed, decided to use the handcuffs on his belt. My parents hovered behind her. They looked smaller than I had ever seen them. My father's tuxedo looked ill-fitting, as if he had shrunk in the wash. My mother was weeping into a napkin, but she was careful to keep her voice down. They knew, finally, that they had lost the audience. "Eliza," my mother whispered as I walked over to inspect the signatures. She reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back, keeping the distance between us precise and unbridgeable. "How can you do this? We are a family. You are destroying us over money." "I am not destroying anything," I said, picking up the signed confession and handing it to Diego. "I am just turning on the lights. You are the ones who decided to rob the house in the dark." "We only wanted to secure the future," my father muttered, unable to look me in the eye. "We thought if Jenna and Liam were established, we could all relax. We could finally stop worrying." "You wanted to stop worrying by making me carry the load," I corrected. "You wanted to sell my work to buy her happiness, and you were willing to declare me incompetent to do it. You were ready to erase me. Dad, tonight, you just erased yourselves." I turned to Sheriff Miller. He was a good man who had known me since I was 19 and trying to fix the fence line by myself. He looked at the USB drive in my hand, then at Jenna. "It is up to you, Ms. Shepard," the sheriff said formally. "I have enough here for an immediate arrest on charges of grand larceny and identity theft. I can take her out the back way, or I can walk her out the front in cuffs." Jenna looked up, her eyes wide with terror. She stopped breathing. My parents gripped each other's hands. I looked at my sister. I looked at the white dress that cost more than my first truck. If I put her in handcuffs now, she becomes a victim in her own mind. She becomes the martyr who was treated cruelly by her vindictive sister. She would spin a story about how I overreacted. But if she walks out of here alone, if she walks out past the people she tried to impress, stripped of her ring, her fiancé, and her dignity, that is a sentence that lasts longer than jail time. "No handcuffs," I said. Jenna let out a sob of relief. "But," I added, my voice hardening, "no back exits either." I pointed to the main doors at the far end of the ballroom, the doors that led out to the driveway where their rented limousine was waiting. To get there, they would have to walk the entire length of the room. They would have to walk past the investors, past the socialites, past the rumors. "You leave through the front door," I commanded. "All of you, together." "Eliza, please," Jenna whimpered. "Everyone is looking." "Yes," I said. "They are. Make sure you hold your head up. It is the last time you will ever be inside Shepherd Hollow." I signaled to the band. The conductor, a confused man who just wanted to get paid, lifted his baton. They began to play a slow, mournful waltz. It was the perfect soundtrack for a funeral. Jenna stood up. She did not look at me. She grabbed her purse, clutching it like a shield. My parents fell in behind her. The family lawyer, Mr. Henderson, looked at me, gave a stiff nod of apology, and joined the procession. They began to walk. The sound of their footsteps on the stone floor was audible even over the music. The guests stopped eating. They turned in their chairs. 200 pairs of eyes followed them. There were no whispers now. The judgment was silent and absolute. They watched the Shepherd family, the parents who stole, the sister who lied, march toward the exit like exiles being banished from the kingdom. When they reached the heavy oak doors, Jenna hesitated. She looked back. Just for a second. I was standing in the center of the room, my muddy boots planted firmly on the white runner. I did not wave. I did not smile. I just watched. She pushed the door open and stepped into the night. My parents followed. The door swung shut with a final, resonant boom that felt like a gavel striking a sounding block. "Diego," I said into my radio. "On it," Diego replied. A second later, the sound of the heavy magnetic locks engaging echoed through the hall. Clack thud. They were gone. The air in the room seemed to change instantly. The heaviness lifted. The lie had been excised. I turned and walked toward the terrace doors. I needed air. I needed to wash the smell of their desperation off my skin. I stepped out onto the stone balcony. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and cold. The smell of wet earth and pine was sharp and clean. Below me, the garden lights illuminated the paths I had laid with my own hands. "You have a flair for the dramatic, Ms. Shepherd." I turned. Victoria Carrington was standing in the shadows of the trellis, smoking a thin cigarette. She had not left with her son. She had stayed to watch the end of the show. "I did not ask for the drama," I said, leaning against the cold stone railing. "I just finished it." "Fair enough," Victoria said. She walked over to stand beside me, looking down at the orchard. "You know, before tonight, I thought this place was just a hobby farm, a tax shelter for a dying family. But the way you handled the accounts, the way you locked down the inventory, that was impressive." "I run a business, Mrs. Carrington," I said, "not a charity." "I can see that," she replied. She took a drag of her cigarette and exhaled a plume of smoke into the night air. "My private banking division hosts 4 executive retreats a year. High net worth clients, very private, very expensive. We usually go to the Hamptons or Aspen, but I like the security here, and I like the management." She turned to face me. "I am offering you a contract," Victoria said. "Exclusive vendor status for the Carrington Heritage Group, 4 events a year, Full buyout of the property for the weekend. We pay a premium for privacy, and I guarantee you, my checks do not get declined. I looked at her. This was the woman who had just paid $85,000 to erase her son's mistake. She was ruthless. She was cold. And she was the best business partner I could ask for. I extended my hand. Then I stopped. I looked at my glove. It was still stained with the gray clay of the irrigation ditch. I would shake on it, I said. But I am still wearing the garden. Victoria looked at my hand. Then she looked me in the eye and smiled. It was a genuine smile, sharp as a razor. Dirt washes off, Eliza, she said. Weakness does not. We have a deal. She nodded once, tossed her cigarette over the railing, and walked back into the party to salvage the evening. I stayed on the balcony. I looked down at the mud on my boots. I looked at the trees standing tall in the darkness. I walked down the stone steps, away from the music, away from the champagne, and into the garden. I knelt down by the bed of hydrangeas I had saved from the flood earlier that afternoon. I pulled off my glove and pressed my bare hand into the wet, cold soil. It felt real. It felt solid. For 10 years, I had been working this land to pay for people who saw me as a servant. I had been the frantic girl trying to keep the water out while they drank the wine. But tonight, the parasites were gone. The debt was cleared. The locks were changed. I stood up and wiped my hand on my overalls. I looked back at the house. It was glowing in the night, a beacon of stone and light. And for the first time, it did not look like a burden. It looked like a castle. And I was the queen. The party would end. The guests would leave. But tomorrow morning, when the sun rose over the valley, I would be the only one here to greet it, and that was worth every single cent of $85,000. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below with your location and let me know what you thought of Eliza's revenge. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who need a little satisfaction in their day.